What's good, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Nati with another video, and today we'll be discussing the Redskins schedule that was released on Thursday night, and I'll also be giving you guys a record prediction for the 2020 season. And without further ado, let's go. Redskins schedule, right? I just want to start things off briefly with, a few important tidbits about the schedule as a whole. So we actually don't have any official primetime games this year, and that hasn't happened since 1982. And if that doesn't tell you anything about, the state of the Washington Redskins, I don't know what does. This team doesn't really deserve to be on primetime, and when we are on primetime, we've been pretty crappy. And then, there have been a lot of reports out there, people saying that, we have a low strength of schedule, we should be expected to win a couple more games because of it. And to be honest, I want to push back against that. A low strength of schedule doesn't really mean much because a lot of teams, especially, the teams that we have on our schedule this year, could really improve. Like the Bengals, for example, who had an amazing draft, and the Browns, who are, one step removed from that incredible free agency. So I don't necessarily trust that statistic, and, I think our schedule is actually kind of tough. And I do like the fact that we have a mid-season bye week, because for how long have we not had a mid-season bye week? Like, we've had a bye week early in the season or super late. It hasn't really helped us much. And then I think weeks 12 to 14 look like the toughest stretch by far of the season. We are going to be at the Cowboys, at the Steelers, at the 49ers. And to make things worse, like, for the Steelers game, for example, we'll be in Pittsburgh in December, the really cold weather, possibly snow. It's going to be a tough stretch and against three really good teams. And I'll get a little bit more into it once I break down each one of those games. So now on to a week-by-week schedule. So week 1, we'll be playing at home against the Eagles. And again, we start with the Eagles, right? A divisional foe, one of our fiercest foes, and arguably the best team in the division. And my biggest concern about the game is, can we slow down all the Eagles' speed that they have on offense now? They just drafted Jalen Reagor. They got Marquise Goodwin from the 49ers, and they already had Deshaun Jackson, even though, obviously he gets a lot of injuries, but, he's still on the team. All that speed on the offense, can we really match that on defense? Sure, we have Kendall Fuller. Ronald Darby has great straight line speed, but he gets beat a lot in coverage, so that's my biggest concern. But I think our offense, and Scary Terry especially, I think we can actually do a lot of good work against that Eagles defense. And ultimately, even with, the addition of Darius Slay, like we saw last year when Darius Slay was on the Lions, Terry McLaurin beat him a bunch. And, if it weren't for mediocre quarterback play during that game, Terry McLaurin could have had, 100, 150 yards. I really believe that. And so I don't really think the addition of Darius Slay will matter too much in terms of, limiting Terry McLaurin's production. And I think our front seven will actually do a lot of good work against that pretty stout Eagles offensive line, especially with Chase Young coming on board and all the pieces that we already had, and possibly Reuben Foster coming back. So I ultimately think that that game will result in a win for us. And then week 2, we play away at the Cardinals. We played the Cardinals 5 out of the last 8 seasons, even though obviously they're not in our division. And I think a lot of people are sleeping on the Cards. I think the Cards actually should be much improved with the additions of DeAndre Hopkins, rookies Isaiah Simmons, Josh Jones. And then on top of that, obviously they already had Kyler Murray, who they just drafted 2 years ago now, and Old Man Fitz, who's still playing really well, and then Chandler Jones on defense. They also, I think, have Budda Baker as well. So all those players, man, make for a pretty good team. Still have some holes, but I think it should be a tougher test than what most people think. And I honestly can't even decide if that's going to be a win or a loss for us. So I'll leave that as a toss-up at this point. And then week 3, away against the Browns, right? At 1 p.m. And it's the first time we're actually playing the Browns, the new look Browns, in the regular season. And the Brownies, I think, should be much improved, actually. Last year, obviously, they had that big free agency coming into the season, and everybody expected them to be really good, except for me, because I thought they actually had a lot of holes on defense outside of, Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward. And they actually shored up some holes. They got Grant Delpit in the draft, a really good safety from LSU. They also got Jack Conklin and Jedris Wills. And I think those two acquisitions could really help their offensive line. And who knows, the Browns might actually be what we expected out of them last year. So, and the Browns offense now, obviously with all those pieces, it might be too much, man. An improved Baker, I think, and the addition of Austin Hooper. Sorry guys, got to count that as a loss for us, unfortunately. And then week 4, we play against the Baltimore Ravens, right? The Battle of the Beltways, our semi-rival, not really rival since we haven't played them too much, but geographic rival possibly. And it's the Battle of the Beltways, and the main question, right, is how in the world will we stop Lamar Jackson, right? I think our front 7 will do a little bit of good work during that game, but it's super hard to contain Lamar Jackson. And I don't know, man. I think Lamar Jackson is really that X factor on the Ravens. Obviously, he won the MVP last year, but on top of that, they made a lot of good improvements, over the offseason. They acquired Calais Campbell, for instance, and I think those acquisitions, the improvement of the team, on top of the improvement of Lamar Jackson, the reigning MVP, I think it'll just be too much for the Redskins, and I ultimately think, fortunately, it'll result in a loss. And then week 5, we play at home against the Rams, and we'll be playing against our old pal, right, Sean McVay, once again. And the Rams, not the Super Bowl contending team that we saw, a couple of years ago. They're actually pretty mediocre. They lost Todd Gurley. He was pretty washed up at this point, but still, it's a loss. They lost Corey Littleton. They lost Dante Fowler. And man, Jared Goff is middling at best, man. And I ultimately think it's going to be a win for us, like it was a couple years ago when we had Jay Gruden leading the team. And then week 6, we play against the Giants, right, at 1 p.m. And, obviously it's going to be the Daniel Jones versus Dwayne Haskins show 3.0. And that's pretty much enough, right, for all of us to pay attention to that game. But I think limiting Saquon will be a huge problem for us. It has been a huge problem for us the last couple of years. And I think that in combination with playing away, where we've had a lot of trouble playing at MetLife Stadium, I think, ultimately it will result in an L for us. Even though they're two pretty evenly matched teams, I think just playing away will pretty much decide, the loss for us. And then week 7, we play against the dreaded Dallas Cowboys at home. We've had success actually playing at home against the Cowboys over the last 5-6 years. So there's that going for us. At the same time, man, the Cowboys offense looks very scary right now with the addition of CeeDee Lamb from this year's draft, on top of the fact that they already have Amari Cooper, Ezekiel Elliott, Dak Prescott obviously as quarterback. I just think, and Michael Gallup as well, it's a lot of weapons, man. But I think our offense could actually do a lot of work against that Cowboys defense, especially after they lost Byron Jones and Robert Quinn. Not just 2 ordinary players on that defense, 2 really big playmakers last year. And I think those 2 players not being there could be really big losses and ultimately result in us getting a win, honestly. I think Terry McLaurin will again do some work. I think our much improved offense will do some work as well. And Dwayne Haskins hopefully will be much improved by that point. And then week 8, like I said before, we have our midseason bye. And then week 9, we play at home against the Giants. And, we've had a lot more success versus the Giants at home. And I think by that point, Dwayne Haskins will have a much firmer grasp of the playbook, the Scott Turner playbook that has been brought in. And I think Chase Young will have a field day during that game after gaining some footing in the NFL. And ultimately, I think the Redskins will actually pull out the W there. And then week 10, we play away at the Lions. And this will be a battle between the number 2 and the number 3 picks in the 2020 NFL Draft, obviously, with Okudah and Chase Young. And I think it's a very winnable game, especially with that terrible season that we had last year. We still found a way to beat the Lions, and I think we can beat them again this year. And the Lions aren't a much improved team because they pretty much just swapped Darius Slay for Jeff Okudah, one good corner for another good corner. And I think our defense can actually do a lot of good things against the Lions' weak offense, even with Stafford manning the quarterback position for them. So I think that will ultimately result in us getting a win come week 10. And then week 11, we play against the Bengals, right? The Chase Young versus Joe Burrow show. Number 1 versus number 2 pick in the draft. And I think Young will be excellent in that game, especially because while the Bengals improved their offensive line, they didn't improve it to the point where it's become a stout offensive line almost overnight. I think they do still have some holes, especially on the interior. Even with Jonah Williams coming back from injury. But the Bengals do have a pretty good offensive skills group. They have Joe Burrow, obviously, who they just drafted. They have T. Higgins, who they just drafted. They also have AJ Green coming back, and Joe Mixon, who is a really solid running back in this league. But ultimately, I think the Bengals defense is just not it, bro. And the Redskins will find a way to pull out the W there. And that'll be a 4-game winning streak come our Week 12 matchup against the Cowboys. And speaking of Week 12, it will be on Thanksgiving, right? Dallas Cowboys, Thanksgiving. And it will pretty much be our only sort of primetime game where everybody's watching. And I personally love the Thanksgiving games, just being around the family, eating good food, and just watching our team pretty much just play on that day. And I think playing at Dallas actually is really scary, especially with it being a sort of primetime game. It might be an ugly game for us just because it is, away, and also I'm coming off a short week, and, we have a very young, inexperienced team. So I do ultimately think that will result in an L for us. And then week 13, we play away at the Steelers. Big Ben should be back, and Juju, I personally think, will be much improved from the pretty mediocre performance that he had last year. They also have Mika Fitzpatrick, who they traded for, I think halfway during the season last year, and he'll be here the whole season. So I think that will be a really good, piece on that defense. Steelers games are tough in general, especially with DMV native coach Mike Tomlin manning that team and always getting the Steelers ready to play regardless of injuries, as we saw last year with that 8-8 season. So I do think it will ultimately result in an L for us, especially with it being in Pittsburgh in December. And then on week 14, we play away at the 49ers, and I think it will be a very tough game against the reigning NFC champs, obviously. And, it will be the Trent Williams game where we traded Trent Williams, obviously, in this year's draft, and it'll be the first time playing against him and playing against his team. We'll also be playing against a lot of former Redskins coaches, including, obviously Kyle Shanahan, who I personally think is a snake, but it's another story for another day. And it'll also be the Chase Young versus Nick Bosa show, right? 2 very young stud pass rushers drafted in consecutive years from Ohio State, number 2 overall. So it should be an interesting game from that sort of storyline. But at the end of the day, I think it will be a loss for us just because the 49ers are pretty powerful and their running game is very, 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 very hard to stop. And then week 15, we play at home against the Seahawks. In the game, we'll be playing, obviously, against the DMV native, Russell Wilson. And my main question to this game, kind of like the Lamar Jackson and Ravens, game is, can we really stop Russell Wilson? He's very mobile, a very tough test for any defense, but especially our defense that, should be much improved, but at the same time, very young, very inexperienced. And I think ultimately, with that Seahawks offense, with Russell Wilson, DK Metcalf, Chris Carson, I think ultimately the Seahawks will carry out the W, even though it will be at home for us, just because of all those weapons and all the experience they have, obviously. And then week 16, we'll be playing against the Panthers at home at 1 p.m. It'll be taking place during Christmas weekend, so obviously the festivities, celebratory mood that everybody will be having will surround the game. And Ron Rivera will be playing against his former team, right, for the first time. So that should be a huge storyline, in addition to a lot of Redskins coaching staff also being former Panthers staff. So it's really a coming home of sorts, right, for a lot of Redskins staff. And I think it will be tough to limit McCaffrey, even though we did a pretty good job of it last year, especially compared to like other teams and how much Christian McCaffrey went off against those teams. And we did pull out the W as one of our 3 wins. And I do kind of think that we'll figure out a way to pull out a W here, and it'll be a good week 16 win. And I think Ron Rivera obviously will be especially happy, of course. And then week 17, we play away at the Eagles. This is our last game against any divisional foe, right? And, if the team shocks us this year, this game could be for the division, could be for a playoff seed, right? But I think nevertheless, it will be a tough game. We'll be against the Eagles, right? Which always give us a run for our money. And I still think Scary Terry will go off. At the same time, I think the Eagles will actually have something that they're fighting for during that game. So that's why I think it will amount to a loss for us, especially with it being at Philadelphia in early January, right? Altogether, realistically, I see about a 7-9, 8-8 season for us. As I discussed in the State of the Redskins video, I think that's okay, right? Like, we're a semi-rebuild team, and I see Riverboat Ron Rivera ultimately building this team the right way for the first time in the last, 20 years. And I think after a couple more drafts, a couple more free agencies, we'll be the perennial winner that I expect Ron Rivera to build from this team. I really do. But at this point, we don't have all the pieces. We still have a lot of holes, like I discussed in the State of the Redskins video. And I think 7-9, 8-8 is about what this team should be come the 2020 season. And yeah, that's all I got for this video, guys. If you could like, comment, subscribe, that would be super, super awesome. And I look forward to making more videos in the coming weeks and months. See you next week.